Willowbrook State School opened in 1947 on Staten Island, New York, a state-run institution for children and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
In the mid-20th century, institutionalization was widely considered the most humane and efficient method of caring for people with developmental disabilities. Families were often actively encouraged by physicians and social workers to place their children in such facilities, where they were promised medical treatment, education, and supervised care. However, the reality inside Willowbrook reflected the opposite.
A system of chronic overcrowding, deliberate underfunding, and institutional neglect that would make it one of the most infamous facilities in American history. This exposure of inhumane conditions at the Willowbrook State School sparked media outrage nationwide, leading to reform and lasting advancements in disability rights, protecting people of disabilities today.
The kind of mournful wail that it's impossible for me to forget.
The Willowbrook campus was originally constructed in 1938 to 1939 as Halloran General Hospital, a U.S. Army facility used during World War II. After the war, New York State converted the site into a residential institution for individuals labeled at the time as mentally retarded, which reflected prevailing medical and social attitudes.
During the 1940s and 1950s, institutionalization was considered progressive public policy. In 1960, more than 550,000 individuals nationwide lived in these state institutions.
However, as admissions increased, state funding did not keep pace. Overcrowding became chronic.
Staff to resident ratios were dangerously low.
Because there were fewer aides than necessary, they were feeding a couple of people at a time or asking other patients to assist with feeding. Undoubtedly, it was dangerous and unprofessional.
In some cases, one attendant would be responsible for more than 40 residents.
If you're someone with very little training and you're watching 100 people with intellectual and other disabilities, you might not know how to handle that situation.
Beginning in 1955, Dr. Saul Krugman, a pediatrician serving as Willowbrook's research director, conducted controlled hepatitis studies on newly admitted residents. The subjects were children with developmental disabilities who could not meaningfully consent to participation.
Krugman later defended his methods, arguing that hepatitis was already prominent at Willowbrook due to its overcrowded conditions, and that the studies led to important advancements in hepatitis vaccine development. Parents were often told that enrolling their child in the study would guarantee faster admission to Willowbrook, which, at the time, had a long waiting list.
The darkness was not unknown to those in power. In 1965, Senator Robert F. Kennedy toured Willowbrook and publicly called it a snake pit.
I visited the state institutions for the mentally retarded, and I think particularly at Willowbrook that we have a situation that borders on a snake pit.
Willowbrook had a system set. The institution rarely let outsiders in. Families had limited access, and inspections were infrequent.
Once a child was admitted to Willowbrook, the parents were not allowed inside. There were no welcoming tours and visiting days were always held in a special room. But a lot of patients did not. They stayed on the ward all the time, during weekdays, weekends, and holidays.
This institutional darkness persisted for decades, creating an environment where neglect could continue unseen.
This system worked flawlessly until February 2, 1972, when journalist Geraldo Rivera was granted access to Willowbrook and filmed conditions for ABC News. Unlike other journalists who had been denied access to film, Rivera had stolen a key with a friend who had been fired from Willowbrook.
Well, Mike called me at one point and said that he had just been fired from Willowbrook. And I said, "What's Willowbrook?" It sounded so nice, that lyrical name, the Willowbrook. I thought it was like a country club. He said he had just been fired and that the conditions there were so appalling. And I listened. I had no experience at all with either institutions or with the developmentally disabled. So I was utterly unprepared for the reality of Willowbrook.
The images shocked viewers nationwide. The darkness that had hidden the truth was suddenly illuminated. For a school that had been advertised to care and remedy the disabled, it in fact appeared to do the opposite on Rivera's documentary.
How can I tell you about the way it smelled? It smelled of filth, it smelled of disease, and it smelled of death.
Governor Hugh L. Carey, after acknowledging the environment, began asking for an increase in budget to improve mental hygiene funds, bringing basic services to an acceptable level. However, the legislature had rejected Carey's proposal.
This was the flood of light piercing through decades of ignorance, revealing the darkness of the cruelty and neglect that had been normalized inside of the institution.
Outrage spread quickly. Families of residents, disability advocates, and concerned citizens organized protests, wrote letters, and demanded accountability. Many articles spread about the Willowbrook State School. Some described Willowbrook as a cage, or even a big town's leper colony.
The New York Civil Liberties Union filed suit against the state of New York, arguing that Willowbrook's resident had constitutionally protected rights to safe and humane living conditions, education, and proper medical care, rights that the state had violated for decades. The legal battle would take years, but it had finally begun.
In 1975, the Willowbrook Consent Decree was issued, mandating immediate reforms. It mandated increased staffing and supervision ratios,
Improved medical and mental health care,
regular inspections and accountability measures,
and the expansion of programs to encourage education, recreation, and socialization.
Media coverage continued to shine attention on disability rights, sparking discussions that went beyond just Willowbrook, challenging societal assumptions about the care and rights of people with disabilities.
Media history, and it was one of the reports that had a lot to do with changes in mental institutions across the country.
Despite the decree, it took years to fully implement meaningful reform. Willowbrook remained open for over a decade after its expose.
By 1987, Willowbrook closed. Its campus was redeveloped as the College of Staten Island, a transformation from a site of neglect into a place of education and opportunity. Former residents were relocated to community-based group homes, which emphasized individual dignity, integration, and self-determination.
The day that I left Willowbrook felt like the beginning of a new life. I was born again and I was free. It took me some time to adjust to living outside Willowbrook. I had to learn to set goals and fight for my rights.
But whatever the court decides, it's really the way all of us think and feel and act toward the retarded that will ultimately determine whether or not they get the same chance to live the normal life we want our own kids to have.
Willowbrook's legacy shaped deinstitutionalization nationwide, influencing laws and policies through the 1970s and 1980s, such as the Developmental Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights Act, the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act of 1980, and the American with Disabilities Act of 1990, which guaranteed rights, accessibility, and protections for people with disabilities across America.
So many dedicated organizations for people with disabilities who gave their time and their strength. And perhaps most of all, everyone out there and others across the breadth of this nation, our 43 million Americans with disabilities. You have made this happen. All of you have made this happen.
The story of Willowbrook is a reminder that watchfulness, advocacy, and legal frameworks are the steady lights that prevent vulnerable populations from being mistreated.
Today, the Willowbrook Mile Memorial serves as a reminder of both suffering and progress, and the College of Staten Island represents the transformation from neglect to opportunity.
The lights turned on at Willowbrook, and the world could no longer ignore the shadows. A nationwide reaction that led to lasting reform.